Flight attendant mocks black woman. Minutes later, her true identity leaves everyone in shock. Stepping onto a flight, filled with excitement as your life's work reaches its peak, only to be met with subtle judgment and dismissiveness. Not because of who you are, but how you're perceived. What if the very person who dismissed you had no idea you were moments away from being recognized as one of the brightest minds of our time? Before we dive in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoy heartwarming stories of courage and justice, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe for more incredible tales. Your support means the world and helps us reach even more people with these powerful stories. Now let's jump right in. The soft hum of engines filled the cabin as passengers boarded the first-class section of the sleek, state-of-the-art airplane. The air smelled faintly of leather and citrus, a carefully curated atmosphere meant to exude luxury and exclusivity. Maya Daniels clutched the strap of her well-worn tote bag and stepped carefully into the aisle, her presence an unassuming ripple in the sea of opulence. She adjusted her simple scarf, the edges frayed from years of use, and scanned her ticket again to ensure she had the right seat. Row 2A, she reminded herself, letting the laminated card slip back into her bag. Maya's dark skin seemed to draw a few lingering glances as she moved forward, her modest outfit a stark contrast to the tailored suits and designer dresses of her fellow passengers. Some eyes darted away quickly, uncomfortable with being caught staring. Others, bolder, scrutinized her openly, as if calculating her net worth or her reason for being here. She ignored them. Maya had learned long ago not to let such looks unsettle her. She kept her chin high, though her fingers trembled ever so slightly on the strap of her bag. After all, she wasn't here to prove her worth to strangers. She was here to get to Geneva, a city that now represented a culmination of years of sacrifice, sleepless nights, and quiet victories. "Excuse me." A sharp, condescending voice pierced through the low murmur of boarding passengers. Maya turned to see a woman standing beside her, impeccably dressed in the airline's tailored uniform. Her platinum blonde hair was pulled into a sleek bun, and her name tag gleamed under the cabin lights. Lauren. The slight tilt of her head and her tight, forced smile didn't suggest friendliness. "Yes?" Maya asked politely, her voice steady. Lauren's eyes flicked to Maya's bag and back to her face. "Are you sure you're in the right cabin?" The words were coded in a sugary tone, but the implication hit like a slap. Maya blinked, caught off guard for a moment. "Yes, my seat is 2A, she replied, keeping her tone even. Lauren's smile tightened further. "First class is up here. Economy boarding is that way," she said, pointing down the aisle with a manicured finger. Maya felt a hot flush of anger rise in her chest, but she forced herself to remain composed. "I'm aware," she said softly, holding up her ticket as proof. Lauren glanced at it briefly, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Well," she said, dragging out the word, "if you need anything, just let me know." She stepped aside, her gaze lingering a second too long, as if trying to find some fault in Maya's presence. Maya moved past her, finding her seat by the window. She stowed her tote bag carefully under the seat and sank into the plush leather chair. The seat enveloped her in its soft embrace, but the tension in her shoulders didn't ease. She exhaled slowly, her hand smoothing over her scarf as she reminded herself why she was here. This wasn't the first time she'd been judged prematurely, and it likely wouldn't be the last. But today was supposed to be different. Today was a celebration. The thought brought a faint smile to her lips, though it quickly vanished as Lauren's voice cut through the air again. "I just don't understand how some people can afford this," Lauren murmured to another flight attendant, her voice low but not low enough. Maya's jaw tightened. She wasn't the only one who heard it. A businessman across the aisle glanced up from his newspaper, his brow furrowing slightly as his eyes flicked between Lauren and Maya. He seemed about to say something but hesitated, burying himself back in the financial section instead. The comment wasn't new. It wasn't even creative, but it stung all the same. Maya busied herself adjusting the buckle of her seatbelt, willing herself not to let Lauren see the flicker of hurt in her expression. She would not give her that satisfaction. "Would you like something to drink?" Lauren's voice returned, this time directed at Maya. Maya looked up, startled by the sudden question. "Just water, please," she said. Lauren raised an eyebrow as if the choice amused her. "Of course," she said, and turned on her heel without another word. Moments later, she returned with a glass of water and placed it on Maya's tray with a bit more force than necessary. The liquid sloshed dangerously close to the rim, but Maya caught the glass before it could spill. Lauren walked away without acknowledging it. As the plane prepared for takeoff, Maya stared out the window, her reflection ghostly in the glass. Beyond the horizon lay Geneva, a city where her work would finally be recognized, where the years of being underestimated, overlooked, and dismissed would culminate in something no one could take away from her. But for now, she was just another passenger, judged by the color of her skin and the simplicity of her attire. Maya folded her hands in her lap, drawing strength from the knowledge of what was to come. Justice would be served soon enough. She just had to wait 8 more minutes. The plane began to taxi down the runway, the faint rumble of the engines vibrating through the floor. Maya closed her eyes briefly, hoping the soothing hum would settle the knots in her stomach. But the tension from earlier lingered, heavy like an invisible weight pressing down on her shoulders. She had endured moments like this before, where prejudice tried to diminish her spirit, but it never got easier. Her thoughts were interrupted when Lauren reappeared in the aisle, pushing the beverage cart with calculated precision. Her perfectly polished smile returned as she attended to the other first-class passengers, pouring glasses of champagne and offering elaborate hors d'oeuvres. When Lauren reached Maya's row, her demeanor shifted. The professional veneer cracked slightly, and there was a glint of something in her eyes, disdain perhaps, or a challenge. Lauren leaned down just enough to make her presence uncomfortably close. "Are you sure you wouldn't like something more suitable?" she asked, her voice dripping with condescension as she gestured toward the champagne flutes on the cart. "It's complimentary, you know." Maya looked up, her expression calm but her eyes sharp. "Water is fine, thank you." Lauren smirked, as though she had won some unspoken game. "Suit yourself," she said, rolling the cart forward. Minutes later, as the cart was being wheeled back down the aisle, Lauren's movements became hurried, almost careless. She passed Maya's seat with a little too much force, and the cart bumped into the edge of Maya's tray table. The glass of water toppled over, spilling its contents across Maya's lap. "Oh dear," Lauren exclaimed, her voice high-pitched and insincere. "I didn't see that coming." Maya flinched as the cold water soaked through her trousers. She reached for a napkin, but Lauren made no move to help, standing there with an exaggerated look of surprise plastered across her face. "I'm so sorry," Lauren continued, though the lack of urgency in her tone betrayed the apology. "You should really be more careful with your drinks." Maya's patience was wearing thin, but she refused to let Lauren provoke her into a reaction. "I believe it was your cart that caused the spill," she said evenly, dabbing at the water with the edge of a napkin. Lauren's smile faltered for a split second before returning, tighter than before. "Of course. Let me get you a fresh glass of water," she said, her voice clipped. She disappeared into the galley without waiting for a response. Maya adjusted her seatbelt and shifted uncomfortably, the damp fabric of her trousers clinging to her skin. She caught the sympathetic gaze of the businessman across the aisle. He offered her a small nod as if to say, "I saw that." Lauren returned a few moments later, this time without the cart. She handed Maya a new glass of water, her fingers gripping the rim in a way that felt intentionally careless. Maya accepted it carefully, noticing a faint smudge of lipstick on the glass. "Here you go," Lauren said, straightening up. "Anything else I can assist you with?" "No, thank you," Maya replied, her tone polite but firm. As Lauren turned to leave, she muttered under her breath, just loud enough for Maya to hear, "Some people don't belong in first class." The words hit like a punch to the gut. Maya's grip tightened on the glass, her knuckles turning white, but she forced herself to remain composed. She had faced worse than this. She wasn't about to let Lauren's petty behavior ruin her resolve. A voice broke the tense silence. "Excuse me, miss," said the businessman from across the aisle. He had folded his newspaper and was now leaning slightly forward, his expression stern. "I couldn't help but notice how you've been treating this passenger." Lauren turned to him, her smile stiffening. "Is there a problem, sir?" "Yes," he said bluntly. "Your behavior. It's unprofessional, to say the least." Lauren's eyes darted between the businessman and Maya, her composure cracking slightly. "I assure you I've done nothing wrong," she said defensively. "I've been nothing but polite." The businessman raised an eyebrow. "Polite? Is that what you call knocking over her drink and blaming her for it? Or muttering insults under your breath?" A faint murmur spread among the other passengers. Some glanced at Lauren with disapproval. Others avoided eye contact entirely, uncomfortable with the growing confrontation. Maya wanted to speak up, to thank the businessman for stepping in, but she knew it would only escalate the situation further. Instead, she met Lauren's gaze briefly, her calm demeanor a silent assertion of dignity. Lauren straightened her uniform and forced a smile, her cheeks flushing. "I'll be sure to pass your feedback along," she said to the businessman, her voice brittle. Without another word, she retreated to the galley, her heels clicking against the floor. The businessman turned to Maya and offered her a small, reassuring smile. "If she gives you any more trouble, let me know," he said. "Thank you," Maya replied quietly, her gratitude genuine. For the next half hour, the cabin settled into an uneasy calm. Lauren kept her distance from Maya, but the tension was palpable. Passengers whispered among themselves, and Maya could feel the weight of their stares, some curious, others apologetic. Maya gazed out the window, the clouds below stretching like an endless sea. She tried to focus on the horizon, on the city waiting for her beyond this flight, but the knot in her stomach refused to untangle. She didn't know it yet, but the storm was far from over. Justice was already in motion, quietly building toward its inevitable conclusion. The soft ding of the seatbelt sign echoed through the cabin, signaling that the plane had reached its cruising altitude. The tension from earlier lingered in the air like an invisible storm cloud, and Maya could feel its weight pressing down on her. She adjusted her scarf, trying to focus on the distant horizon visible through the oval window. But her composure, as steady as it had been, was beginning to crack. The humiliation was fresh, the sting of Lauren's words echoing in her mind. "Some people don't belong in first class." She inhaled deeply, closing her eyes for a moment, willing herself to rise above it. She reminded herself why she was here, why this flight mattered. The announcement in Geneva would be the culmination of her life's work. Nothing, and no one, could take that away from her. Lauren reappeared, this time with a clipboard in hand. Her professional mask was firmly back in place, but there was a hint of something colder in her expression. She stopped at Maya's row and leaned down, just enough to make her presence intrusive. "Miss Daniels," Lauren began, her voice dripping with false politeness. "I noticed you didn't request a meal option when booking your ticket. We have a limited selection remaining. I just wanted to make sure you understand our policies." Maya looked up, her eyes narrowing slightly. "I'm aware of the policies. I didn't make a specific request because I'm fine with whatever is available." Lauren's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Of course, it's just that, in first class, we usually encourage passengers to pre-select their meals. It's standard practice." The words were harmless enough on the surface, but the tone carried an edge that felt like another veiled jab. Lauren stood there for a moment longer than necessary, as if daring Maya to respond. "I'm fine with whatever is available," Maya repeated, her voice steady. Lauren scribbled something onto the clipboard and walked away, the faintest smirk tugging at the corner of her lips. The businessman across the aisle, who had been quietly observing, sighed audibly. He leaned over slightly, lowering his voice. "It's unbelievable," he said, shaking his head. "She's clearly targeting you." Maya glanced at him, offering a small, appreciative nod. "Thank you for speaking up earlier," she said softly. He smiled faintly. It's the least I could do. Behavior like hers shouldn't go unchecked. As their conversation tapered off, a soft murmur rippled through the cabin. Passengers were beginning to take notice. Some exchanged whispered remarks, their eyes flicking toward Maya and then to Lauren as she moved through the aisle. The air grew heavy with unspoken tension. Maya could feel the scrutiny, the mix of pity and curiosity from those around her. She straightened in her seat, determined not to let their gazes shrink her. It happened suddenly, a break in the monotony of the flight. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, calm and commanding. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. I'd like to take a moment to make a special announcement." The murmurs in the cabin quieted instantly. Passengers leaned forward in their seats, curious. "Today, we are honored to have a very special guest aboard this flight," the captain continued. "Miss Maya Daniels has just been awarded the Nobel Prize in Medicine for her groundbreaking contributions to cancer research. This is a monumental achievement that will save countless lives around the world. On behalf of the entire crew, congratulations, Miss Daniels." The announcement landed like a thunderclap. For a moment, there was stunned silence in the cabin. Then the applause began, tentatively at first, but quickly swelling into a resounding ovation. Passengers turned to look at Maya, their expressions shifting from curiosity to awe. Maya's cheeks flushed as she nodded politely in acknowledgement. She wasn't one to seek the spotlight, but in this moment there was no avoiding it. The businessman across the aisle clapped enthusiastically. "Incredible," he said, smiling warmly at her. "You're truly remarkable." Maya smiled faintly, murmuring a quiet, "Thank you." But her attention was drawn to Lauren, who stood frozen in the aisle, her clipboard hanging limply at her side. Lauren's face had gone pale, her carefully constructed facade crumbling under the weight of the revelation. She blinked, her lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. The flight attendant hesitated for a moment before stepping forward, her expression a strained mix of shock and forced enthusiasm. "Miss Daniels?" she began, her voice faltering slightly. I had no idea. Congratulations on such an incredible achievement." Maya met her gaze calmly. "Thank you," she said simply, her tone neutral. Lauren lingered, as though searching for the right words to repair the damage she had done. "If there's anything I can do to make your flight more comfortable, please don't hesitate to let me know." The irony of the statement was not lost on Maya. She studied Lauren for a moment, her expression unreadable. "I think I'll be fine," she said finally, her voice steady but firm. The applause subsided, but the energy in the cabin had shifted irrevocably. Passengers whispered among themselves, their words filled with admiration for Maya and quiet disapproval of Lauren's earlier behavior. The businessman leaned over again, his tone playful. 8 minutes ago, she couldn't be bothered to pour you a proper glass of water. Now she's falling over herself to impress you. Maya allowed herself a small smile, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. "Life has a funny way of correcting itself," she replied. But beneath her calm exterior, she knew this was only the beginning. Justice, she thought, had a way of unfolding in its own time, and for Lauren, that time was approaching swiftly. The cabin's buzz of excitement gradually settled, but the air remained charged with unspoken tension. Maya adjusted her scarf and returned her gaze to the window, her expression calm but her thoughts churning. The announcement had brought a moment of vindication, but she had no intention of letting it overshadow the reason for her journey. Lauren, however, seemed to have other plans. The flight attendant's earlier confidence had dissolved, replaced by a strained eagerness to regain control of the situation. She hovered near the galley, occasionally glancing at Maya with an unreadable expression. It was clear that she was formulating her next move. Lauren approached Maya's seat with a forced smile, her heels clicking against the polished floor. In her hands, she carried a small tray adorned with an assortment of fruits and chocolates. "Miss Daniels," Lauren began, her voice overly sweet, "I thought you might enjoy a special treat, courtesy of the airline." She placed the tray on Maya's table with a flourish, as though presenting a grand gesture. Maya glanced at the tray, then at Lauren. Her expression remained neutral. "Thank you, but I'm not hungry," she said politely, her tone cool but not unkind. Lauren's smile faltered. "Oh, but these are premium selections. Imported chocolates, the finest we offer on board," she added, as if that would somehow erase her earlier behavior. "I appreciate the effort," Maya said, her voice steady, "but I'm fine." The simplicity of the refusal left Lauren momentarily speechless. She hesitated, the tray still balanced awkwardly on the edge of the table. Finally, she retreated, her forced cheer slipping into something closer to frustration. Not long after, Lauren returned, this time holding a glass of champagne. Her smile was brighter, almost desperate, as she placed the glass on Maya's table. "Perhaps a celebratory drink is in order," Lauren said, her tone a bit too eager. "It's not every day someone wins a Nobel Prize." Maya looked at the glass, the bubbles rising in delicate streams. "I don't drink," she replied simply. Lauren blinked, clearly unprepared for the response. "Oh, well, we also have sparkling water or juice. Whatever you'd prefer." Maya's gaze met Lauren's, calm and unwavering. "I already have water, thank you." The finality in her voice left no room for negotiation. Lauren stood there for a moment, her smile faltering again, before she quickly collected the glass and retreated to the galley. The repeated interactions did not go unnoticed by the other passengers. The businessman across the aisle raised an eyebrow, his lips curling into a faint smirk as he watched Lauren's increasingly frantic attempts to curry favor. Others whispered quietly, their gazes darting between Maya and Lauren. It was becoming clear to everyone that Lauren was trying to make amends, but her efforts only highlighted the tension she had created. The more she tried to fix things, the more out of place she seemed. Lauren, undeterred by her earlier failures, made yet another approach. This time she carried no props, no trays, no glasses, just her strained smile. "Miss Daniels," she began, her tone softer now, almost pleading. "I just want to say how deeply sorry I am for earlier. I didn't mean to offend you." Maya set down the book she had been pretending to read and looked up, her expression unreadable. "Didn't mean to offend me," she repeated, her tone neutral but with a subtle edge. Lauren hesitated, clearly realizing she had stepped onto thin ice. I didn't realize who you were," she admitted. Maya raised an eyebrow. "And if I weren't who I am, would your behavior have been different?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswerable. Lauren opened her mouth to respond but closed it again, her cheeks flushing. The other passengers who had been half listening suddenly found their magazines and screens very interesting. Maya continued, her voice calm but firm. "Respect shouldn't be reserved for those you think are important. Everyone deserves it." Lauren swallowed hard, her smile now completely gone. "You're right," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Maya nodded slightly and returned her attention to her book, effectively ending the conversation. Lauren lingered for a moment before retreating, her shoulders slumped. Despite Maya's clear refusal to engage further, Lauren couldn't seem to let the matter rest. Her anxiety and need to repair her image drove her to make one last, desperate attempt. She returned once more, this time carrying a handwritten note on the airline stationery. She placed it carefully on Maya's tray table. "I just wanted to leave this," Lauren said, her voice almost trembling, "in case you wanted to provide any feedback about your experience." Maya looked at the note without touching it. "I think we both know the feedback I would give," she said, her voice calm but unyielding. Lauren's face turned crimson, and for a moment, she looked like she might cry. She quickly stepped back, mumbling something unintelligible before disappearing into the galley for the remainder of the flight. As the plane continued its journey, Maya allowed herself a small sigh of relief. She had faced countless moments like this before, where others had tried to diminish her worth based on their biases. But today, the universe had provided a swift and undeniable reckoning. She glanced at the note Lauren had left, untouched on the table. It was a symbol of desperation, an attempt to salvage something that had already crumbled. Maya decided she wouldn't dignify it with a response. Instead, she returned her gaze to the horizon outside the window, the clouds parting to reveal the vast expanse of sky. In just a few hours, she would land in Geneva, where her work would be celebrated on a global stage. The thought brought a small, genuine smile to her lips. Justice, she thought, didn't always need to be loud. Sometimes, it was enough to let the truth speak for itself. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the flight entered its evening phase, casting long shadows across the plush seats. Passengers settled into quiet activities, reading, watching movies, or dozing off under soft blankets. The hum of the engines filled the space, a constant backdrop to the unspoken tension that still lingered. Maya remained composed, her book open on her lap, though she hadn't turned a page in several minutes. Her thoughts swirled like the clouds outside the window, the earlier events replaying in her mind. Lauren's desperate attempts to redeem herself had been transparent, clumsy, and ultimately futile. But what troubled Maya more was the broader reality that this wasn't an isolated incident. It was a pattern, a reflection of a world still grappling with deeply ingrained prejudice. She took a sip of her water, the cold glass grounding her in the present. She reminded herself of her purpose, of the lives her work would touch. That was what mattered. Lauren had disappeared into the galley after her last attempt to reconcile with Maya, her usual confident stride replaced by nervous pacing. The whispers among the crew hinted at her growing unease. "Did you see her face when the captain made that announcement?" one attendant murmured to another. "She's panicking," the other replied. "I mean, she should be. This is going to get back to management for sure." Lauren pretended not to hear them, but the sting of their words settled in her chest. Her professional facade had already crumbled, and the weight of her actions pressed heavily on her shoulders. Every glance from a passenger felt like judgment, every whisper an indictment. As the cabin grew quieter, the businessman from across the aisle stood and made his way to the galley. He leaned casually against the counter, his sharp eyes fixed on Lauren. "I thought I'd have a word," he said, his tone polite but firm. Lauren looked up, startled. "Can I help you with something, sir?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Yes, you can," he replied, "by explaining what you were thinking back there." I don't know what you mean," Lauren stammered, though her flushed cheeks betrayed her. He folded his arms, his expression unyielding. "Miss Daniels is a Nobel laureate. She's one of the most accomplished people on this flight, arguably in the world. And yet, you thought it was acceptable to treat her with disrespect." Lauren's eyes darted to the side, searching for an escape. "I wasn't disrespectful," she said defensively. "I just misjudged the situation." "Misjudged?" The businessman's voice hardened. "You didn't misjudge. You made assumptions, and you acted on them." Lauren opened her mouth to respond, but he cut her off. "If you're hoping to salvage your career, you'd better think long and hard about how you treat people, because next time, you won't have the luxury of hiding behind ignorance." He turned and walked away without waiting for a reply, leaving Lauren standing there, her hands gripping the counter as she tried to steady herself. Meanwhile, Maya had resumed reading, though her thoughts were still tinged with the events of the day. She felt the businessman's gaze on her as he returned to his seat. He offered her a small nod, a silent acknowledgement of her resilience. Maya smiled faintly in return, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. She appreciated his support, but she didn't need validation from anyone. Her worth wasn't defined by how others treated her. It was rooted in her work, her perseverance, and the lives she had touched. She closed her book and leaned back in her seat, letting her eyes drift shut. The soft rumble of the engines lulled her into a light doze, her mind settling into a quiet calm. Not long after, the captain's voice came over the intercom again, this time with an announcement for the crew. "Ladies and gentlemen, as we approach the halfway point of our flight, I'd like to remind our staff to prepare for a special service in honor of Miss Daniels. Let's ensure she receives the recognition she deserves." The words were simple, but they carried a weight that sent a ripple through the cabin. Passengers exchanged glances, some nodding in approval, others murmuring quietly. The businessman clapped softly, a gesture of quiet respect. Lauren, still in the galley, felt her stomach drop. The captain's words felt like a spotlight, illuminating her earlier behavior. She knew she had lost the respect of her peers, and perhaps even her job. As the service unfolded, Maya accepted the gestures with grace. A small celebration was organized in her honor, with passengers offering congratulations and the crew presenting her with a commemorative token from the airline. Maya thanked them sincerely, her calm dignity a stark contrast to the turmoil that had surrounded her earlier. Lauren stood on the periphery, watching silently. She had been excluded from the celebration, her earlier actions too glaring to ignore. The other attendants moved around her, their interactions curt and professional, but devoid of camaraderie. Maya caught Lauren's gaze briefly and offered a small, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't forgiveness, at least not yet, but it was an acknowledgement of shared humanity. For Lauren, it was a lifeline, a glimmer of hope that change was still possible. As the plane continued its journey, the atmosphere in the cabin softened. Maya returned to her book, her composure unshaken. The businessman across the aisle smiled warmly at her, a silent gesture of solidarity. Lauren retreated to the galley, where she sat quietly, her thoughts a tangled web of regret and realization. She had been given a harsh lesson, one she wouldn't soon forget. For Maya, the flight was more than just a journey. It was a reminder of the strength she carried within her, the resilience that had brought her this far. Justice had unfolded naturally, not through confrontation, but through the quiet power of truth. The horizon outside the window grew brighter as the plane inched closer to Geneva, where Maya's true triumph awaited. The plane's engines hummed steadily as the captain announced the descent into Geneva. The sky outside glowed with a soft orange hue, the sun dipping toward the horizon and casting long shadows across the cabin. Passengers began to stir, adjusting their seats and collecting their belongings, the quiet anticipation of landing filling the air. Maya closed her book and tucked it neatly into her bag, her thoughts shifting to the event that awaited her. Geneva represented a culmination of her life's work, the pinnacle of years spent in quiet determination. But the events of the flight lingered in her mind, intertwining with her excitement. She glanced out the window, the patchwork of the Swiss countryside growing clearer below. The journey had been long, but she had never been one to shy away from endurance. It was the journey, after all, that had shaped her strength. In the galley, Lauren stood apart from her colleagues, her usual confident posture replaced with uncertainty. The celebration of Maya's achievements had been a stark reminder of the gulf between her actions and the dignity Maya carried. The captain's earlier announcement had further cemented her isolation among the crew. One of the other attendants, a young woman named Emily, walked past Lauren without making eye contact. The tension between them was palpable, and Lauren felt the sting of her colleagues' quiet disapproval. She had spent the latter half of the flight replaying her mistakes, the weight of her actions settling heavily on her shoulders. Lauren knew she had miscalculated, that her judgment of Maya had been shallow and biased, but what truly haunted her was the realization that her behavior reflected something deeper, something she wasn't sure she could fix with a simple apology. As the plane began its descent, Lauren made her way back into the cabin, her hands trembling slightly. She hesitated for a moment near Maya's seat before taking a deep breath and stepping closer. "Miss Daniels," she said quietly, her voice lacking the confidence it once held. Maya looked up, her expression calm but guarded. Lauren swallowed hard. "I know I've already apologized, but I wanted to say it again. I've been reflecting on my actions and there's no excuse for the way I treated you." Maya studied Lauren for a moment, her gaze steady. "You're right," she said evenly. "There is no excuse." Lauren flinched slightly at the words, but Maya's tone wasn't harsh. It was measured, deliberate. It carried the weight of someone who had endured far worse and had long since learned to rise above it. "I hope," Lauren continued, "that I can learn from this. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know that I'm deeply sorry." Maya nodded slowly. "Acknowledging your actions is the first step," she said. "But words alone aren't enough. Change comes through action." Lauren nodded, her eyes downcast. "I'll do better," she said quietly, before retreating to the galley. The interaction hadn't gone unnoticed by the passengers seated nearby. The businessman across the aisle observed the exchange with quiet approval, his respect for Maya deepening with every passing moment. Others whispered among themselves, their glances toward Maya now filled with admiration and respect. One woman seated a few rows behind leaned over to her companion. "She handled that with such grace," she murmured. "I don't think I could have done the same." "She's remarkable," the companion replied. "It's no wonder she's accomplished so much." The whispers didn't faze Maya. She had long since learned to focus on what truly mattered, and the opinions of others, whether positive or negative, held little sway over her. Still, there was a quiet satisfaction in knowing that the truth had been laid bare, that justice had unfolded in its own way. As the plane touched down on the runway, a gentle jolt shook the cabin. The captain's voice came over the intercom, announcing their arrival in Geneva. Passengers clapped politely, a tradition that always amused Maya. She smiled faintly, grateful for the symbolic closure it provided. The attendants moved quickly to prepare the cabin for disembarkation. Lauren worked silently, her movements efficient but devoid of the usual cheer she displayed during landings. She avoided eye contact with Maya, her earlier confidence now replaced with humility. As the passengers began to gather their belongings, the businessman leaned toward Maya. "Good luck in Geneva," he said warmly. "I have no doubt you'll inspire even more people there." "Thank you," Maya replied, her smile genuine. "I appreciate your kindness." When it was finally Maya's turn to leave, she stood, collecting her tote bag with practiced efficiency. Lauren was stationed near the exit, her smile tentative as she thanked each passenger for flying with them. As Maya approached, Lauren's voice caught slightly. "Miss Daniels," she said, her tone softer than before. "Thank you for flying with us. I hope the rest of your journey is everything you deserve." Maya paused briefly, meeting Lauren's gaze. "I hope you find the strength to grow from this," she said, her voice calm but firm. "For your sake and for others." Lauren nodded, her expression one of quiet resignation. "I will," she said softly. Maya stepped off the plane, the cool Geneva air greeting her as she descended the stairs. The city stretched out before her, a testament to her journey, her struggles and her triumphs. As Maya walked toward the terminal, her steps steady and purposeful, she reflected on the flight. It had been more than a journey from one place to another. It had been a microcosm of her life's challenges and the resilience she had cultivated in response. Justice, she knew, wasn't always about grand gestures or dramatic confrontations. Sometimes it was about holding firm in the face of adversity, about letting truth and dignity speak louder than anger. Ahead of her lay the next chapter of her journey, one that would bring her work to the global stage. But for now, she allowed herself a moment to breathe, to take in the significance of the moment. She had arrived, not just in Geneva, but in her purpose, her power, and her place in the world. The soft murmur of travelers filled Geneva's bustling airport as Maya stepped into the terminal. The bright overhead lights cast a warm glow on the sleek, modern interior, and the distant sound of announcements echoed faintly in the background. She adjusted her scarf and clutched her tote bag, ready to leave the flight behind and focus on the purpose of her trip. But as she moved through the terminal, a familiar voice called out from behind her. She turned to see the businessman from the plane hurrying toward her, a kind smile on his face. "Miss Daniels," he said, slightly out of breath. "I just wanted to thank you again. Watching how you handled everything on that flight, it was inspiring." Maya nodded graciously. "Thank you. It means a lot to hear that." He hesitated, his expression thoughtful. "You might want to know, I overheard a few other passengers talking. One of them is a journalist, and I believe they caught wind of what happened." Maya's expression remained calm, though her brow furrowed slightly. "A journalist?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "They seemed interested in writing about it. I thought you should know, in case this becomes something larger." Maya sighed quietly. She wasn't surprised. Moments like the one on the flight often had a way of growing beyond their origins. But this wasn't what she wanted the focus to be on. Not when she was in Geneva to celebrate her work. Not her endurance of prejudice. "Thank you for letting me know," she said. "But I'd prefer to keep the attention on what really matters." The businessman smiled knowingly. "Sometimes the story finds you, whether you want it to or not." With that, he bid her farewell, and Maya continued toward the exit. Yet his words lingered, a quiet reminder that justice often unfolded in unexpected ways. In another corner of the terminal, a woman sat hunched over her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Her name was Clara Menard, a seasoned journalist with a sharp eye for stories that mattered. She had been seated a few rows behind Maya on the flight, and while she hadn't caught every detail, the announcement and subsequent interactions had been impossible to ignore. Clara had watched as passengers whispered among themselves, as the flight attendant's demeanor shifted from arrogance to nervousness. She had seen Maya's quiet strength, her refusal to retaliate, and the profound impact it had on those around her. Now, seated in the terminal cafe, Clara began to piece the story together. Her angle wasn't just about the discrimination Maya had faced. It was about the grace with which she had navigated it, the quiet power of justice when wielded with dignity. She typed furiously, her words capturing the essence of what she had witnessed. On a routine flight to Geneva, Nobel laureate Maya Daniels reminded us all of the true meaning of strength and justice. Faced with bias and disrespect, she stood firm, her quiet resolve more powerful than any confrontation. In doing so, she not only claimed her rightful place in the world, but held a mirror up to the prejudice that still lingers in our society. Clara paused, rereading her work. The story wasn't just about Maya. It was about the broader implications, the lessons to be learned. She decided to reach out for more details, determined to tell the story in a way that honored its complexity. Back on the plane, Lauren had just finished assisting the remaining passengers with disembarkation. Her hands trembled slightly as she tidied up the galley, her mind replaying the events of the flight. She knew her actions had been wrong, but the weight of potential consequences pressed heavily on her. As she stepped into the crew's briefing room at the Geneva airport, her supervisor, a stern-faced woman named Marion, was waiting for her. Marion held a tablet in her hand, the screen displaying a social media post about the incident. "We need to talk," Marion said, her tone leaving no room for argument. Lauren's heart sank as she sat down across from her supervisor. Marion's eyes were sharp as she spoke. "I've already received multiple reports from passengers about your behavior on this flight," she said, "and now it seems the story is beginning to spread." Lauren's breath hitched. I didn't mean—" Marion raised a hand to cut her off. "Intentions don't matter. Actions do. And your actions reflect poorly not just on you, but on this airline." Lauren swallowed hard, her mind racing. She knew an apology wasn't enough, not now, but she also knew that the repercussions of her behavior would be far-reaching. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I know I let my bias cloud my judgment. It was wrong, and I'm prepared to face the consequences." Marion studied her for a moment, her expression unreadable. "This isn't just about consequences for you," she said. "It's about the message we send as an airline. Discrimination has no place here, and we will be making that very clear, publicly." Lauren nodded, her shoulders slumping under the weight of the reality she now faced. Maya had arrived at her hotel, a serene space overlooking Lake Geneva. She stood on the balcony, the cool breeze brushing against her skin as she gazed at the water. The day's events weighed on her, but she refused to let them overshadow the reason she was here. Her phone buzzed on the table behind her, a message lighting up the screen. It was from a colleague who had heard about the incident on the flight. "Maya, I just saw an article about what happened. I'm so sorry you had to go through that. Your strength is inspiring as always." Maya sighed, her fingers hovering over the keyboard as she composed a response. "Thank you. It's unfortunate but not surprising. I just hope the focus remains where it should, on the work we're doing and the lives we're trying to save." As she sent the message, a quiet determination settled over her. She couldn't control the actions of others, but she could control how she responded, and that, she believed, was where true power lay. By the next morning, Clara's article had been published, quickly gaining traction online. Headlines buzzed with variations of the story, each emphasizing Maya's quiet strength and the broader implications of the incident. Discrimination at 30,000 feet, a lesson in grace from Nobel laureate Maya Daniels. Nobel winner's dignity exposes airline bias. Strength in silence, how Maya Daniels turned prejudice into a teachable moment. As the story grew, so did the conversations it sparked. People from all walks of life weighed in, some sharing their own experiences, others reflecting on the importance of addressing systemic bias. Maya, meanwhile, prepared for her event in Geneva, her focus unwavering. The world might now know her story, but for her, it was just another chapter in a much larger narrative, one that she was determined to shape with purpose and integrity. Geneva buzzed with anticipation. The Nobel Prize ceremony was the pinnacle of the city's cultural calendar, drawing dignitaries, journalists, and some of the world's most brilliant minds. The grand hall, adorned with crystal chandeliers and golden accents, was already abuzz with conversation as attendees filled the seats. Maya Daniels arrived at the venue with her head held high, her modest yet elegant dress a reflection of her humility and grace. Flashes from cameras greeted her as reporters jostled to capture the moment. While many had come to witness a historic moment for medical science, a growing number were intrigued by the story that had emerged during her journey to Geneva. "Maya, can you comment on the incident on the flight?" one journalist called out. "Do you think this reflects a broader issue in society?" another pressed. Maya paused briefly, turning to face the crowd of reporters. Her calm demeanor silenced the room. "I'm here to celebrate the work that my team and I have done to improve the lives of others," she said, her voice steady. "While the events on the flight are unfortunate, they are a reminder that we all have a responsibility to treat one another with respect and dignity, regardless of appearances or assumptions." The room erupted into applause, her response a masterclass in grace under pressure. Maya turned and continued into the hall, the weight of the moment both heavy and uplifting. Back at the airline's headquarters, the story had reached senior management. The CEO, a sharp and uncompromising woman named Evelyn Clark, convened an emergency meeting with the flight crew involved. Lauren sat at the end of the conference table, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Evelyn wasted no time. "Lauren," she began, her voice crisp, "your behavior on that flight has not only embarrassed this airline but has also betrayed the values we claim to uphold." "I understand, ma'am," Lauren said quietly. "I take full responsibility for my actions." Evelyn's gaze didn't soften. "This isn't just about you. It's about the message we send to our customers and to the world. Discrimination in any form is unacceptable." Lauren nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I know. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." Evelyn leaned forward. "You'll start by participating in mandatory bias training. Additionally, your position will be reassessed after a formal review. But let me be clear, this is your last chance. If there's any further misconduct, you will be dismissed immediately." Lauren nodded again, the gravity of her situation sinking in. She left the meeting with a renewed sense of determination, but also with the knowledge that redemption would require more than words. The grand hall fell silent as Maya approached the podium. The Nobel Prize medal gleamed around her neck, a symbol of her extraordinary contributions to science. She took a deep breath, her gaze sweeping over the audience. "Science," she began, her voice resonating through the hall, is not just about discovery, it's about hope. It's about the possibility of a better future, where barriers, whether they are physical, social, or systemic, are overcome. The audience hung on her every word as she spoke of the challenges she had faced, both as a scientist and as a woman of color. She didn't mention the flight explicitly, but the subtext was clear. Resilience in the face of adversity was as important as the work itself. As she concluded her speech, the hall erupted into a standing ovation. Maya's heart swelled, not from the applause, but from the knowledge that her work would leave an indelible mark on the world. The airline issued a formal apology the following day, acknowledging the incident and pledging to implement systemic changes to prevent similar occurrences. They announced a partnership with several advocacy groups to conduct comprehensive bias training for all employees, a move that earned both praise and scrutiny. Lauren, now back at her base, began attending the training sessions. The experience was humbling and uncomfortable, forcing her to confront the biases she had long ignored. Slowly, she began to understand the depth of her actions and the harm they had caused. Months later, Maya returned to her hometown, where she was greeted with a hero's welcome. Schools and community centers organized events to honor her achievements, and young girls lined up to hear her speak. One day, while attending a local event, a young girl approached her clutching a notebook. "Dr. Daniels," she said shyly, "I want to be a scientist like you. How do you stay strong when people treat you unfairly?" Maya knelt to the girl's level, her smile warm. "You remember who you are," she said. "You focus on your purpose, and you never let someone else's ignorance define your worth." The girl's eyes sparkled with determination. "I won't," she said. Maya Daniels' story isn't just about a Nobel Prize. It's a testament to the quiet strength of those who rise above prejudice and fight for justice with dignity. Her journey reminds us that true power lies in holding firm to your purpose, letting actions speak louder than words. Have you faced a moment where staying strong made all the difference? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for more inspiring tales. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.